All right, so I'm talking with Daniel. We were just talking about basically people arguing. It could be over politics. It could be over dietary preferences. Um, so uh, my thought is that aggression and anger are repressed within our culture. You know, typically, very often, we have repressed um, anger, repressed aggressiveness, which could just be, argumentativeness or whatever. So why is it that people will spend hours or hours arguing online or in a bar or wherever in their living room? Why will they spend so much time arguing about things in certain dynamics of arguing where it's pretty clear, like 14 seconds into the exchange, that nobody's going to change after 2 hours, and yet they'll take 2 hours. Or very little is going to change in 2 hours, Like people are clearly, they just, it's like there's this distress, and we must attack a perceived threat because we don't want other people to know that we're actually distressed or unsure of our political opinion or our dietary preference. I don't want anybody to know that I'm not 100% sure. Daniel, do you want to comment on any of that?
So that makes perfect sense. We can argue about something that even we can maybe be aware or unaware that nothing would change, but we are getting out our repressed emotions, our anger, our frustration. We are getting it out. Just sometimes just for the sake of it.
We're like practicing, the emotion of anger. We're actually hungry to be angry. And it's not that, and when I say that, I want to add, it's not that we're necessarily hungry for anger. It's that we're hungry for vitality. And when we've suppressed anger, then to get angry, actually brings us a sense of aliveness. But there's a lot of other ways to experience aliveness besides anger. But when anger has been repressed, and when people hold this idea that no one should ever be angry or something like that, then that means that they are one of the people who should never be angry. So they hide their own display of anger, and they deny it when they raise their voice. They'll say, "I'm not yelling" or whatever, right? And they'll yell it. So we want to experience aliveness, and we want to experience social interaction, but there's just so much paranoia and hysteria and distress, and and I think that issue of I have nothing left to learn as a persona, I think that's a big issue. When people take this perfectionist, self-righteous orientation of I have nothing left to learn, I've got the 3-volume set of books that describe everything, how everything should be and how everything is, and I have nothing left to learn, and now I'm going to go out and talk to people, and if anybody presents anything outside of my framework of how life should be, I'm going to freak out,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to set up. If you want to use an argument, taking that approach is a good way to set it up. But I find that most people take that approach because they're actually insecure about their intelligence. So
well, yeah. Go ahead.
Right? They're going to overcompensate for their insecurity by taking that approach. But it also can be very useful to actually take that mindset if you're actually looking for an argument. I mean, if you're mindfully doing it, for whatever reason, we can go over the different reasons, but that can be a good way to get somebody, in an argument with you, But for the most part, I think most people are not doing that. What they're doing is they're just protecting their insecurity. It's like, some Swifty flame or whatever. I have nothing left to learn and listen here. And there's nothing, actually, I believe Swifty flame was there's nothing to learn. Nothing matters because it's all hogwash, like what is that? Like that's obviously, it's insecurity, right? I mean, what else could it be?
Well, it could be playful. It would be the other possibility, because it is pretty ridiculous to say something like communication is wrong. You know, so Swifty Flame is just for anybody who's listening to this recording. That's a name of like a Facebook user. So for some Facebook user or some person to say communication is wrong, language is wrong, well, that's already ironic. You know. It's already silly. And, you know, Daniel and my actual interpretation of Swifty at whatever time this was this 2 years ago, year and a half? I don't know when. Yeah, I got blocked by Swifty at some point, right? And then Pete Hughes is the actual, I think that my conclusion was that Pete Hughes and Swifty are the same person, just two different Facebook accounts. But, yeah. Anyway, a year and a half ago, whenever that was, that I finally got blocked. The idea of communication is shameful. You know, that's not literally what was written, but that is such a weird idea. You know, life is shameful. Communication is shameful. Attempting to influence other people onto another, you know, more specific item. Attempting to influence other people is shameful. Well, if you're telling me that something is shameful, isn't that an attempt to influence me? You know? So.
Yeah.
So there's this. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I said, yeah, I was just saying, yeah, you're right.
So anyway, I brought up before we started recording the idea that shame can be relieved. Shame can be created. It can be relieved. You know, no creature, no organism is born ashamed. No vegans are born ashamed of being mammals. I guess that's a complicated reference that I could explain, but you know, breast milk and whatever, vegans, you know, so-called regular vegetarians are okay with dairy products, but vegans are, you know, not okay with dairy products, or they avoid dairy products. So we develop shame as an adaptation, in other words, as like something that benefits us. We, as children, we learn how, you know, we learn what to avoid. So shameful things are things we should avoid. Do we avoid bringing up certain topics around grandma or grandpa? If so, good to know. Do we avoid doing certain things, you know, like even I was at a gathering yesterday and somebody who is a dog owner put some food on the edge of a table right by where a dog was. And I was like, that's dumb. That dog's going to eat that. The dog did not eat it, but they didn't put it right at the corner. They put it close enough, and then they stood right there. They didn't walk away, and the dog did not eat it. But, like, I bring this up because to know what not to do, if, you know, like, you don't put chocolate where a dog can eat it, and if you have food and you put it where a dog can eat it, you need to know that food could be eaten, you know? Depending on the dog, I guess, right? Some dogs are better trained than others as far as grabbing food that they can smell. But generally speaking, if a dog can reach it and isn't trained well, they're going to eat it. So, and there were kids at the gathering. So, you know, if there's a bunch of guys, isn't it appropriate that they talk about subjects that they might not talk about if all their grandmothers were around, or if all their 8-year-old daughters were around, or whatever? You know, of course their people are gonna have different subject matter and different behaviors depending on who's around. I mean, so shame is part of just learning what to avoid, and you don't need to learn why to avoid the things to avoid. At a young age, you just learn, don't put your finger in the electrical outlet. Why? Because it'll hurt, because it's bad, because, you know, whatever, you know. At some point you give a verbal explanation. At some point you don't. You just, you know, the dog gets close to the area and the dog has that collar that zaps them, and they get that small zap. Why? So they don't get killed or whatever, so they don't run in the road. So you give them these small pains to condition them so they don't die or whatever. Comments?
Yeah, I mean, that's the same way we do with our kids. I mean, the whole Santa Claus story, and you're putting restrictions in language, basically, using that to help to raise them. I mean, that's the same principle as with a dog. I mean, we don't train our kids with chains necessarily, or leashes, I should say, or whatever. But yeah, I understand what you mean. That the use of shame.
But you think it's a good idea if you have like if you have a yard and you bury that little dog collar line, in the perimeter of the yard, and you bury it, and then put that collar on a young child. You think that's a pretty good idea, right? I mean, that's what we and to take this analogy further, that's kind of what we do with certain criminals. We don't necessarily have the pain, electrical shock thing, but we track location of people, chip implants, So when I say the jokes, or when I say the kind of extreme examples, well, they do overlap in some way with the actual practices of some cultures. Anyway, you can continue. You were talking about Santa Claus, which one of the things I think of is Santa Claus is a much more bribery-oriented thing rather than blackmail of what I'm going to do to you if you don't. It's more what I will do for you, but only if you, like in a bribery sense.
Yes.
Where do you want to go with all that?
But I'm saying that there's also a way of using shame, like when Santa's watching you and God is watching you, and Jesus is watching you. And,
yeah.
So, it helps, for kids anyway, it certainly helps the parent, because they don't have to necessarily be there the whole time. If a kid thinks Santa's watching and God is watching, right, they do have to be there the whole time. So, yeah, there's positive ways to use shame. There's no question about it.
Well, and I don't know if the Santa thing is shame necessarily. I still think of that as this bribery orientation. But let me tell you some of what I did in my youth as a quick story. So we had these little, like a calendar where we mark off as each day passes. It's 30 days till Christmas, then 29. We had a picture of Santa like over that the little thing where we mark off the dates of the calendar, the month of December or whatever. The weeks go by. So we mark it off, and every day is the kids who do this. My sister and I would be the ones who would go and mark off the calendar. So we usually, right, it would be us. So we look at that picture of Santa, the cartoon picture or whatever, the picture from the mall from 3 years ago, it doesn't matter. And we see the picture of Santa, we mark off the date, and we have this ritual to remind us to be obedient and the idea being we'll get better presents the more obedient we are. And it's not even totally inaccurate. The less that I bug my parents the first 3 weeks of December, the more shopping they get to do at the toy store. Is that true? Yeah, sure.
So then we can say that shame has nothing to do with it, but as far as the God angle, that's certainly, you're supposed to feel ashamed if you don't live by a certain standard or live by a certain set of rules. So that's more shame-oriented, would you agree? Yeah,
and then we get into actual punishment. So there's this kind of implicit punishment and then actual punishments, like it's one thing to say we're going to kick you out of our church if you don't pay your tithe regularly and on time. But in a government situation, if you don't pay your taxes every month or every year or whatever, we're going to take away your house, and we're going to take away 20% of your paycheck, and then we're going to put you in jail on top of all that. Or, if you don't, if you continue to, whatever. In certain situations, somebody will even be put in jail. So the shaming is basically presenting a threat. They're saying further punishments are, when someone shames another person, they're indicating that there's a willingness to do more severe punishments than just a social humiliation. I mean, that's at least a common possibility. So you see how that fits?
Yes.
And as far as me being specifically shamed by one other person or betrayed where like there's an intention to humiliate me, you know, that's happened in very small ways, and then that's happened in, you know, a couple prominent ways, but I'll use the very small way example first, or maybe I'll ask you for one. If you have a couple of kids in a schoolyard setting or in a household or whatever, what is a way that they will humiliate each other? I mean, this is so common. It's like there's 1,000 examples you could give. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, you'd either make fun of their mother, or you can make fun of, you know, if you're privy to the information that they like a girl, you can certainly say something about that girl that would make them feel ashamed. You know what I mean?
Or you can say she's a pretty, yeah, that girl's pretty good looking, or pretty, you know, pretty good personality or whatever, and you can, you know, there's all sorts of ways to mess with people, basically.
Yes. Yes. And that's, you know, we use trial and error with people, friends, and, you know, whatever. We'll use trial and error, but yeah, there's different ways to shame people. Different things will work with different people, but there's, yeah, everybody's got their triggers, you know.
So we, you know, we will intentionally humiliate other people just one-on-one with them by saying something like that. You know, like, you know, guys will sometimes do this in a actual bonding process where they'll say that shot sucked. You know, they're like playing basketball and they will say, oh my God, that was the worst shot ever. You're never, you know, whatever. They'll say things like that out of, what do you call that? Affinity or whatever, out of, you know, friendliness. They're actually not really criticizing the other person in a kind of a demeaning sense or a shaming sense. They're literally just, you know, they're just playing roles, I guess you'd say, right?
Yeah, having fun with them.
Being sarcastic, or even they make a shot and then you know somebody makes a shot that's really hard and you say, well, that was easy though, or finally you made a shot, or, you know, whatever. There's just so many things, and I'm mentioning sports analogies because a lot of times that's when boys will tease each other. You know, I saw a TV show like on some sports channel recently about, I think it was Michigan's basketball team several years ago. They were 5 freshmen were starters for the Michigan basketball team, and they went to the final of the NCAA and lost, like by 3 points. Very close game. And one of the things that team was known for was taunting other players. So they would actually like research the team that they were going to play against, find out things about individuals, and like if somebody's, you know, mother had recently been diagnosed with cancer, they would bring it up during the game in order to, you know, to distract the other players, the opposing players. And the example I just gave could be, you know, wildly inaccurate, but the idea being they were just, you know, they weren't breaking any rules, you know. It wasn't even a technical foul to do it. Or maybe it got to a point where they did get technical fouls called on them. I think that was one of the things, is the NCAA was like, these guys are going so far. We're gonna suspend somebody or whatever, or call a technical foul or whatever. But
you know the irony about that?
Go ahead.
That was one of the most shameful losses in NCAA history. Chris Webber was one actually kept the NBA.
Oh, he called the timeout. Right. Go ahead.
They didn't have. And that was the big reason why they lost. So it was kind of funny, and that's one of the more shameful moments in NCAA history, and that's how they got to that game. So I find that to be pretty funny.
Well, that's how they lost the game, right?
Yeah.
And the twist on it was, or one of the other twists, and I watched this TV show where they like interviewed basically all 4 of the other guys, and Chris Webber wouldn't appear on the interviews. and I think I have this detail right. And so some of his teammates or somebody on the on his bench, presumably his teammates or a coach or whatever, yelled at him to call timeout, signaled for him to call timeout. And when they went back and reviewed the tapes of it, you could see you couldn't really see who it was, but somebody's hands were raised up above their head with that T symbol, meaning call a timeout. So as he comes down the sideline, he's looking, forward at his own bench. They signal the T. He gets down to that corner and calls a timeout. And then he's, really ashamed about it. So he had this immense emotional attachment to winning that championship game, and his mistake causes his team the game. So it's not that he lost only; it's that he let down his teammates, and the whole social implications were significant. And do you know a little bit more about how it went from there? Did he go to the NBA? Did he quit after 2 years?
No, Chris Webber, he of all the Fab Five, he had the most successful NBA career. He played probably for 12, 13 seasons or whatever it was.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he was the most successful of all. They all were highly, scouted, and at least 3 of them were drafted pretty high up. But he had one of them, he had the best NBA career after that debacle.
So even after messing up that game, he wouldn't talk about it, but he did have he had a really good career as a professional basketball athlete. Okay. But the thing was, he wouldn't do an interview for the show, for the TV show. He didn't talk about it ever. He did, and actually another twist was the other guys were saying it ended their friendship with him. He wouldn't talk to them anymore. So there were some pretty, interesting social twists. These were guys that had grown up for 10, 15 years. They'd been friends. And then after that game, most of them get together and talk and occasionally socialize and, enjoy each other's company. And then that one guy who messed up that one play, he ends up, whatever. But another twist that I think of, and this was part of the TV show that I watched, there was a guy who got indicted and I think convicted of giving gifts to the players. Do you remember that detail by any chance?
Yes, and that was at Michigan you're talking about? No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, at Michigan in particular. And
it came out like years after the fact, though, right?
I don't know for certain. I mean, probably. I watched the show like 3 weeks ago, and this is all about things that happened 20 years ago or something. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think they did come out a couple years later. And I remember Chris Webber having to go speak in court and stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was another thing. And then, you know what? I made a mistake. I'm glad that I happened to run into this tangent for anybody who cares about the detail here, which is probably no one. But anyway, it wasn't that thing about the timeout. It was a few years later when Chris Webber was in the NBA, and then I think it was the court system, not just the NBA itself or something, the NCAA, but the court system subpoenaed him, had him come in and talk about that older guy who had given them gifts, and the other guys, everybody received gifts. He gave people rides to practice or rides home from practice, and that was a violation of NCAA rules, just to give them a ride home. So they were saying this guy did 100 things for 100 people. He wasn't if he was involved in trying to influence the outcomes of games from a betting standpoint, to have his favorite, buddy throw the game, that was a separate issue. But the other guys in the Fab Five didn't like how Chris Webber presented their old sponsor or patron. They thought, yeah, the guy broke some rules, and so did we. And we didn't know the rules, and he probably did. He probably knew that he was breaking rules. And Michigan, athletic director and all sorts of people, everybody knew that rules were being broken. And in fact, throughout the NCAA, this was common that, people would break some rules sometimes. So anyway, it ended up that was actually the thing, not the wrong timeout. It was that Chris Webber said things that were so like, I'm so innocent and that guy is such a villain. That he vilified the guy. That's what pissed off his other friends, and they actually didn't want to talk to him, if I recall right. So I even represented the whole thing wrong 3 minutes ago.
That sounds like more realistic, happening than the timeout. I didn't know that part of the story, but it didn't sound like it was enough to stop talking to lifelong friends. But yeah, if you just to cover your own ass, you throw somebody else under the bus that people care about, yeah, they're going to have a strong emotional repulsion, aren't they?
Yeah. That's kind of gets to that thing of loyalty, and that's a big deal. I gotta pause the recording for a minute here. I gotta get a charge on my phone.
It kind of fits, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of let the whole team down, and I probably felt shame for that for a long time. You know what I mean?
So I started recording again. If you want me to stop, tell me. But I started recording again. So you're talking about when you had a breakdown in a relationship, there were a bunch of people who were interested in the outcome.
Right. Exactly. Interpersonal relationships, interpersonal emotions that everyone had. So yeah, a relationship actually turns out to be more about than just two people. It affects more than that, right? So when it doesn't necessarily sometimes go the way we hope, there could be a level of shame with that, associated with that, especially if you view yourself as doing something wrong, quote unquote. Either way, you probably feel some shame, but if you do it as, well, I did it the wrong way as opposed to the right way, whatever the heck that is, I don't know. But yeah, that certainly can be a big backlash of shame, and I think that's certainly what happened to me at least once in my life, maybe a couple times.
It reminds me of the thing of withdrawing from a relationship. So we've talked at least in passing about, I don't know how many girlfriends you've ever had, but I've had, I'll just say several. I've only been married once, but I've co-resided with several women. I could say many women. I'd have to think about it, but if I were to say 10, I would say easy 10 women. But there's also times when it's been kind of blurry where really I had my own place, but I just hung out all the time at my girlfriend's place or something like that. But, if I'm driving home from several days a week, I get out of class in college and I go to my girlfriend's house first, or I drive her home from class first or whatever, we may not be living together, but our overlap of our schedule is enormous, So, so I don't think I lived with anybody probably until the last, I'd have to think about it, maybe the last 20 years. But go ahead.
I don't think the dynamics of shame in a breakup are not relevant unless there are close relationships with families. So we just say like, oh, every girl I've ever had a breakup with, I felt shame. Not really. I mean, if I just dated someone for a few months, they barely met my family at all, there'd be no real shame involved in that. Most likely, depending on how the breakup happened, I guess if you're running through the front yard, and the neighbors all come, I mean, yeah, there could be some shame, but I mean, barring any kind of like crazy story, the shame comes in whenever like there's a lot of connection between, a girlfriend and your family or their family and you, and you know what I mean?
I agree with that. It's definitely a whole nother level of social social entanglement or connection, either way you want to phrase it. But for me, the idea of rejecting somebody else or getting rejected, there still has been shame for that. So in sales, I make 100 calls, and if I'm like in a sales a phone room where there's 10 other salesperson, we're all making 100 calls. If I only make 60 and everybody else makes 100, then there can be some weirdness around or some attention to the fact that I made 60 and other people made 100. If I sold 5 and everybody else only sold 2, then that's weird. If I sold 5 and everybody else sold 15, And that's, there are just all these things where is the boundary of emotional significance, right? So the boundary of emotional significance is a floating point. It's different for different people. If I'm, a trainee in a sales job and I am totally, pathetic my first day or my first week or my first hour, nobody's really surprised, or they might not be surprised. But if I have that same performance 3 years into the job or 15 years into the job, I dry for a whole week or a whole month or whatever, then I may start to experience shame. And this gets into things like finances and health too. If I have a health breakdown, do I experience shame along with that? If I have a financial loss of a job or any other financial shift, do I experience shame with that, or even just shame about my general financial situation? Like if I watch 20 TV shows about, rap stars or something, and they spend, $10,000 every night that they go out, or whatever, or $1,000 or whatever it is, do I then feel, horrible because I took 2 months to spend $1,000 on entertainment, And it's, again, that floating point where somebody will feel crappy because I used to spend $1,000 a week on, or whatever. I would take my wife on a vacation every month. Some NBA star or whatever could do that, I'm sure. And then for 3 months, they don't take their wife on a vacation for 3 months. And their wife may go on vacation with other people, and they may live in a $6 million home. But for 3 months, he doesn't take her on $1,000, an hour vacation and feels like crap. That's a floating point of shame. Yeah.
That makes sense. There's different degrees of shame, different extremes of shame, depending on the situation. Makes sense.
So we want to avoid, we talked, I think, when we first started this recording, we were talking about arguing and that kind of thing. So we want to avoid shameful displays of emotion. That can be crying, yelling, being upset. What'd you say?
Ranting.
Weeping?
It's like illogical ranting.
Ranting. Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah, like hysteria, ranting. So there's all the boundaries that there are, and there's these ideas of social propriety, and am I going to lose important relationships? Am I going to lose Daniel's, admiration or something if I say the wrong 4-letter word? Or whatever the thing is. Because while I say that as a joke to you, Daniel, if I were to think hard on it, I could find something offensive that would, significantly offend you, right? It's like everybody can be offended, but we can also notice that in certain interactions or certain relationships, if I say you and I as a relationship or friendship or whatever you want to call it, in our conversations, we might post certain pictures in Facebook that I would never do to somebody who I barely know, But I'll do things that are much more provocative or, basically it's like this repressed whatever shameful topic. I'm going to put that on Daniel's, thread, because 3 other people will like it and join in, and then Daniel's going to, one-up me on the whole, disgusting reference or whatever, if I talk about, vomit or something. It's not that we talk about vomit on your Facebook threads, but if I were to put a picture of, like, Stewie from the Family Guy vomiting or something, you would like it.
because it's so rare that somebody would even say or mention that or post something like that. So I do enjoy things that are rare and things that are funny. To me, that's enjoyable stuff. But I realize that that's not the way everybody sees it. I also enjoy the and forth. You know, because you don't necessarily get a lot of that. You know, at least with my experiences, people I talk to. You know, I mean, I don't.
I agree that when you and I or any group of people or any two people can vibe off of each other or feed off of each other, it's like we give permission for this juvenile exchange of fart jokes or sexual references or I don't know, some kind of like obscure political reference that's gruesome, but there are people that I know I can do that with, you know? And really where we have a really PC or politically correct kind of paranoid culture where everybody, wants to avoid offending anybody and, oh, you can't offend the Jews because if you do, they're going to crucify you like they did that one guy. Like even what I just said right there, that's offensive to somebody, and I understand that, and I don't, I'm not surprised if I say that and 100 people hear it and somebody gets offended, right? Somebody's going to be offended by that eventually if I say it to enough people. But the idea is, I actually have no interest in the fact that it was the Jews who crucified that one guy. That doesn't mean anything to me, So with you and I, we can talk about the Africans and the Nazis and the, Confederates and have the Apaches. I can have 1,000 references to 1,000 different ethnic groups or the vegans or the heterosexualists. I can make up all these categories as, the target of some silly insult. And there's this background of fun. And that's part of what we can value as so rare. We can actually have fun and delight in playing with these social norms or social rules. We can break them, but break them in a way that is fun.
Yeah. Agreed. No, and that's been quite rare for me. I mean, like you said, you know who you can do it with, you know who you can't, and and sometimes you might even get that wrong. I mean, that's absolutely possible. You might think you can say something to somebody, and you find out later you can't.
Right. Or you say it, for a while, and then eventually it pisses them off, and really it didn't bother them until that one day. I know that when I'm on my period or right before I'm on my period, I'm very sensitive to anybody making reference to heterosexualists because I'm just throwing that reference out there as a throwaway, the period thing. But as far as sexist, I thought of the terms heterosexualist, homosexualist, veganist, vegetarianist, and putting "ist" at the end of a word, I think kind of connotates a derogatory thing. You get how it's almost derogatory to say, you're a homosexist. Instead of saying you're a homosexual, you're a homosexist. That's bad, right?
Right.
And the thing is, there's a lot of people, huh? What?
At that moment, you're taking the personal preference and you're just stacking them into a group. I guess that can be very offensive, that I'm not just a number, you know what I mean? I'm a person,
Well,
I guess, right? That might people get offended, I don't know.
Well, the twist is that when somebody is sexist, they usually mean actually mostly men being sexist towards women, but it could be women being sexist towards men on occasion. But to say homosexist, the idea there is kind of like the opposite of homophobia. Like no one should be afraid of homosexuality. Why is it that no one anywhere should be afraid or cautious about homosexuality? Why not be cautious about it? I don't know. Should they? Shouldn't they? Homosexist, and again, I just made this up, but homosexist is like so pro, they're so pro a particular thing that they get into a self-righteous mode and they demean anybody who doesn't already agree with them. How could somebody not be at least bisexual? Come on, right? So I think that I made I don't know that I'm going to have the so-called balls to do this, but maybe I will champion the cause of homosexist and say some really homosexist things as if I was a homosexist myself. But just I want to give advance warning. I'm not really a homosexist.
You're just using the label.
So you have a girlfriend? That's gross. Anyway, you're not a girl, right? You're a guy and you have a girlfriend? God, it's really, what's the word for this? It's really complicated to be in a relationship with a female as a man, at least, right? I mean, how do you deal with that? Are you an idiot? I don't know. See, and then I get into the insults. Are you dumb? What were you saying?
I said, going back to full circle, then we're talking about how we argue about things to protect our own insecurities. I guess I'm homosexist or whatever the word you used.
Yeah.
I guess that's where the insecurity is born from. Yeah.
I want everybody to agree with me that, whatever sexual orientations I promote are what everyone should promote. So there's that basic idea, back to something you had said earlier, when we were talking about the example of people arguing in a bar or something, the Republican versus the Democrat or something. Everyone should agree with me is the starting point of so many arguments. So two people take the orientation of everyone should agree with me already, and two different, sets of opinions. That's a great way to start a long and intense argument, huh? Everyone should already agree with me. Interesting. Where did that come from? Not from freaking, personal experience, because in my experience, everybody does not agree with me, by the way.
Right.
Maybe I think from public school is what I was going to say. Go ahead.
You're saying that was indoctrinated.
Well, I didn't think of that when I was saying it, but then after I said the question, I was like, well, duh. We're put in situations where people are taught that, if they're hysterical and paranoid about cholesterol because cholesterol can kill you, it's poisonous. And if we have this, and then we call that science, and then we put you in a test, it's Friday, so we're going to test everybody, and we're going to reward you if you say, yes, cholesterol is poisonous. And if you say, wait, I thought cholesterol was an important thing that billions of creatures manufacture every day. No, that's wrong. No, right? We get into these contexts of uniformity, or you know what I mean? Like, everyone should agree with me, because if I'm the teacher in the classroom, then what I say is what all the students must repeat in order to get credit on the test and pass the class, and all the good things that go with conforming. So it's that intense pressuring social conditioning for people to conform. That's what sets up all of that antagonism of people thinking everyone should agree with me already, because didn't they go to the school that I went to? What is this idiot who says that they increased the amount of cholesterol in their diet and got healthier? Well, that, and how's that possible? Like, and there's that resistance to information that contradicts the sacred, idolatry. So there's a lot of different forms of sacred idolatry, but the point is, it's so common. And the foundation is everyone should agree with me already. And anybody who doesn't already agree with me is an actual threat, to our social fabric. And the odd thing about that, as I say all that, is that shows a really weak social fabric. Do you get all that?
Yeah.
So if there is no room for dissent, for controversy, for multiple interpretations by different scientists of the same, test or the same principle, whatever, same issue, when there's no room for dissent, when it's this ultra consensus model, that's that's a very tender or insecure social context. And while many, I don't often bring this up necessarily, I'm very clear that the financial order and the economic order that we know currently is quite insecure. I'm very clear on how insecure it is, measures of how insecure it is relative to 2007 or 1999 or 1971 or whatever. There's actual measures that I can interpret logically and say we are at a much less cohesive moment. There's a major shift or tear, to use the social fabric analogy. There's a major tear or a major culture of divisiveness, and I've been studying the issue of divisiveness versus cohesiveness, or conformity, since 2002, maybe 2003 is when I first found Robert Prechter and the Elliott Wave socioeconomic perspective. I'm throwing out words here that I don't expect you to know, Daniel, but we studied social mood. So in graduate school, I studied social psychology like in 93 or something. But I didn't actually really learn anything useful about it necessarily until about 2002 or 3, when I started to get that there are waves of divisiveness and whatever, political correctness, uniformity, right? Or even you could say not just divisiveness, but diversity and uniformity or homogeneity. And then divisiveness is what happens when you've got a really homogeneous situation moving towards diversity. That's called divisiveness. That's all that's going on in society or in a culture. So that's what we've got as we look at Facebook or TV or whatever. There's promotion of divisiveness. There's programming of, everybody should already agree with me. There's this lip service towards diversity, but the reality is there's an intense, uniformity, conformity thing that's going on, and I could even talk about cultural diversity as a social topic. I don't know what to say. Basically, Dan, I think I've never mentioned this to you before, but the Zionist critics, or the critics of Zionism, would say that the Zionists promoted cultural diversity in Europe to thin people, to weaken people's cultural bonds and national affiliations, and to pave the way for the European Union and the dominance of the Jews. So I'm guessing you've never heard me or say that or any reference to that, but if you want to comment on the content, you can. But the basic idea is that when diversity is promoted and an anti-hatred, propaganda is presented, sometimes anti-hatred propaganda is really hatred propaganda, It's like we're just setting up people for, here's what you should hate. You should hate.
No, and that's what mass media is all about. I mean, I can say, I'm anti-hate, but if all I'm talking about is hate, then even no matter what I'm saying, I'm actually causing the opposite effect. So, absolutely. That's why we need 24/7 news. Like, why else would we need 24/7 jamming in your head news?
Right.
Just like we need 13 years of jamming in your head schooling, right? I mean,
So we can. Is it okay to hate a racist who hates other people of other races? Yeah, because we're hating them for a good reason. Is it okay to hate sexists? Yeah, of course. Is it okay to hate socialists? Oh, of course it is. It's just not okay to hate somebody based on the color of shirt they're wearing or where they're from. But you can hate somebody because they're Arab. That's okay.
Right. I mean, as long as you hate for the right reasons, right?
Yeah, you don't want to hate people for where they're from, but if they're Arab in culture, it's not that they're from the Middle East. It's if they're Arab in culture, then it's okay to hate them, right? Or wrong? I don't know. It gets, at some point, it gets to an area that hasn't been socially conditioned with that enough rigidity to have that hysterical reaction of I already know and everybody else should as well because this wasn't on the test, you know. But cultural diversity is promoted in workplaces and schools. It's this big thing of pushing cultural diversity, part of which is what you could call an anti-racist orientation. But the odd thing is, or one odd thing is, places that have real racial tolerance, in many cases there was never an anti-racist cultural diversity propaganda thing from the government. It's just that there was, you know, in Brazil or something, you've got people from Spain, you've got people from Portugal, you've got people from Africa, you've got people from South America, you know, and they, for a couple of hundred years, they do various things together. And there's some degree of, you know, social hierarchy and castes and, you know, socioeconomic stratification. Of course there is, but it's not specifically racial. It's just economic. It's just economic privilege and economic, you know, discrimination. If your credit score is bad and if you don't have $10,000 cash, well, how are you going to buy an ambassadorship to be a delegate to the UN? You know, you got to be able to pay the bribe fee or whatever, or you got to be able to pay the licensing fee to sell alcohol. I say that just because it's, you know, of no consequence to me at all. It's just a ritual. It's just, that's the regulation.
I think the wisest way probably, and then probably the rarest way, is to look at what we're told by media sources, by schools, like by authority figures. I mean, I always say, like, everyone gets so caught up in the what, who, when, where, but no one really says themselves why. Now, why do I constantly hear about this all the time? Why do I constantly hear about that? Because if we look at the why instead of all the little details that we get confused up in, oh yeah, I hate ISIS, blah, blah, because the media says it 24,000 times a day. But if we look at the why are we getting told, what we're getting told, we can probably get a lot more answers. And also see, what you were talking about with all these propaganda about anti-this and anti-that, if we're telling people to focus on these things, there's going to be a lot more racism. If we open up, but this is an anti-racism, but you're telling people to focus on these things. And then this is like, you know, when they do that, it's why, it's you know, United States wide. So then everyone's going to hear on the news, everyone's going to be talking about it. It's like a big deal. Like, oh, we're anti-racism. But the idea is, if you get people to focus on those things, well, then you're going to create, you know, a division, right? People are going to be divided.
Right. It's promoting divisiveness. And I think you saw my article, and I don't know if you read the article where there was the title of divisiveness and forgiveness were in the title. Did you read that one, or did you read it?
I'm sure I did. I don't recall.
No, that was today, so you would remember. Oh, that was today, so you would remember. I just published it like 3 hours ago. So it was about the Charleston murders and the NRA and all that. Yeah, if you don't remember that article, then you probably haven't read it yet.
I think I might not have then. Yeah, it was today.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but you're right on it. I mean, you already know a lot of this stuff. When I sent it to you, and I did, I actually sent it to you. I think I sent it in Messenger. But I know you're right for when I share something like that, you're going to say, yep, I already get that. Oh, that's funny. That's interesting how that person, because it's a dialogue, it's interesting how that other person responded. And they kind of, it's with this minister, and I don't know that I would say she agrees with me or flips her position to agree with me, but I am not agreeing with her. I'm saying that the thing that she's presenting as forgiveness is condemnation masquerading as forgiveness. It's divisive, and it's like, I could say immature, hysterical. You know, I could say lots of things about it, but I was not encouraging her. I was rebuking her, but I was rebuking her in a pretty indirect, gentle way. And I don't know her very well, so I you know, my first comment was like one sentence long, very, you know, kind of plain. And are you up for this kind of a exploration? Because if you're not, I don't care about, you know, your agreement with me in regard to how I was interacting with her. But the thing was, they quoted a NRA board member as saying, well, they took a quote of an NRA board member, and they actually put the actual quotation of what the guy apparently, you know, published in a newsletter. So they did a direct quote of him. But then they said the NRA wants somebody to feel guilty for blah, 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 blah. And they put, their interpretation or their paraphrasing or whatever you want to call it was so divisive and, not at all a surprise to me because I'm used to these people like this new age, the New Thought churches, which I could repeat to you, Dan, if you're not familiar with what I mean. You probably won't care anyway, but there's certain churches where there's just so much anti-hatred hatred,
Yeah. I understand. It's a very, again, we go back to how we can direct other people's, or at least for momentarily, we can control other people's perception, or at least what they're paying attention to. We can have control of that. So when we have control of that, if we choose to focus on something, we can say it's anti, but we're actually, it's not, it has the opposite effect. But people get tangled up on the anti part and say, oh, this is a great thing. But maybe it isn't,
Well, I mean, we're going on and on about all these topics. The real thing is there's social conditioning and there's physical tension. And then there's expressiveness. So when we communicate and we talk about these subjects, we get an increase in vitality even without having to, argue with each other. We might cuss. I was about to use a cuss word. We might say, fuck, but we don't have to have animosity. You and I, or whatever group of people, can interact, have vitality, and actually have bonding instead of having this, just re-stimulation of their anxiety, where I'm like, the anxiety along the lines of the world that I live in is full of these people who are not how they should be and who don't agree with the things that they should agree with and who are threats to my idolatry. And that I use the term idolatry on occasion. I guess it's somewhat rare, but I use it very intentionally. There's a ton of idolatry promoted in schools, in regard to science and history. There's a ton of idolatry promoted in regard to or through mass media, through churches. The classic irony is there's lots of churches that promote a particular way of how things should be for people to relate to hysterically. And in fact, now here's the twist, what if that's the whole purpose of the church? Anyway, I want to let you have a chance to comment.
Well, of course, if it wasn't, I'll say it this way, if it wasn't about promoting what you just spoke of, then why would you have to take 5-year-olds and teach them this? Like, what's the big rush? Why would you teaching them before they can, look, they just said the first word, that's teaching us, because they have no logic yet. So, right, the whole purpose, it shows itself, doesn't it? And also I wanted to say, getting back to, oh man, I lost my thought, but he said something else to add to that. But I've heard this a lot, and this is also some serious irony. People say, well, if you read a lot of books, you're obviously much more well-informed than people who don't read books.
Yeah.
But that can be just as much propaganda as anything else. So when people say, well, I read a lot, so I feel like I'm well-informed, that's not necessarily the case. It can be, but it's not a guarantee. But, that's promoted too. Read a lot of books, you know what I mean? And a lot of that shit is just as much propaganda what you see in the news, If I read Bill O'Reilly's newest book, it's like, okay.
Yeah. That's a transcript of a TV show, really, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, if you read the transcript of the TV show, then you wouldn't necessarily get that trigger of hysteria as much, and you'd actually have the opportunity to consider the logic. But most people have so much hysteria going into picking up a Bill O'Reilly book or opening it that, it's basically just going to re-stimulate their pre-existing prejudices. So, with regard to 5-year-olds and programming them about stuff, it's an interesting thing where we do get into history and society, like social studies, with 5-year-olds, I don't know that there's much of that. But at some point, maybe 3rd grade, 6th grade, at some point, there's a new stage of, kind of intellectual manipulation or programming. So you don't need, huh?
If you're implying that we're not trying to manipulate plant seeds in 5-year-olds, I'm going to have to disagree with that. I think the whole idea is, I go back to this is a great example. I think it's actually hilarious. But if you say to somebody, well, there's a new thing out that Jesus was married with 2 kids, the first thing a Christian would say to you is, I need evidence. But guess what? At 5 years old, nobody needs any evidence. It's actually pretty brilliant, isn't it? Who's asking for evidence when some old man or old lady or whatever standing up in front of the classroom telling you, this is what happened and this is true and this and this? Nobody needs evidence at 5 years old. So I think seeds are definitely planted. I see what you're saying. There's more of a direct effort at a later age to influence kids. But I do think a lot of seeds are planted at an earlier age.
Sure. I mean? Well, sure. Is Santa Claus, when you're 2 or 3, that's manipulative, right? The way that kids are managed in a classroom at age 6 or 7 is much more direct than with 12-year-olds and with older kids. They'll have things like, I'm going to write your name on the board and you're going to get detention and all of those kind of social humiliation features that are typically added maybe 3rd grade or something. But with I don't know, maybe some people do that in kindergarten or 1st grade. But for a lot of kindergartners and 1st graders, they don't have as complicated, disciplinary situations. And with regard to history class and teaching people about, slavery, I'm going to pick slavery. And when I say slavery, what do you think of?
Well, it's weird that Harriet Tubman came to mind on the Underground Railroad, but
the Underground Railroad? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you think of slavery in the U.S. from 17 whatever, to 1860 whatever. That's what you think of. That's actually a little bit weird that when somebody says slavery, lots of people automatically think of a specific instance of slavery. Do you get that detail already? That's actually weird, right? Do you understand how I mean that?
Since it's happened in many cultures throughout time, it is weird that my minds automatically go to a certain place. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, because of schools, TV, right. And somebody was making some reference to democracy and voting on Facebook today, and I said something about Greek democracy and that slaves were not allowed to vote in ancient Greece, even though it was democracy. Let's say 1799 in the U.S., what percentage of the U.S. population could vote? No females, no slaves, no Native Americans. There was really restrictive regulations as far as who could vote at the beginning of the United States. So it might have been 2% of the public could vote, might have been 0.5%, but it wasn't like 20 or 40. It was tiny. And that's what people are talking about when they say, I want it to go back to the original, constitutional intentions. Well, you got to really, I went through a long period of reactionary, ultra-constitutionalist orientation. But we got to keep in mind the Constitution itself was passed by a few hundred people in various state government, whatever positions, and then the people who actually could qualify to even vote for those state government officials was like a tiny percentage of the population. So that's how the Constitution got initiated. How did the U.S. Revolutionary War start? Was it 3% of the public, 9% of the public, 81% of the public? Do you have an idea? And if you don't, why wasn't that detail emphasized? Because lots of other details were emphasized. And it's like the same throughout the world. Cuba, USSR, wherever you go that there's been some kind of revolution, certain details are presented, certain details are ignored, and of the things that are presented, some percentage, 90%, 12%, whatever, some percentage is false.
History is written by the victors, which simply means whatever's best for the current regime is what happened in history, don't you think?
That's a great, starting point for analyzing history. And when we look at what are the issues that I should be ashamed of, or what are the issues that I should be hysterically promoting, if I narrow it down to things that are relevant to me personally and aren't really that connected to social conditioning, it might be a pretty small number of issues, or even zero. So, or maybe it'll be things that, it wouldn't be political issues, but it would be fine to be hysterical if my girlfriend constantly leaves the back door open while it's 110 degrees and the AC is on. Then I could get hysterical about that. But like, the point ultimately is, don't we want to be hysterical about very rare, very, specific things? We don't want to be. Who wants to be hysterical 16% of the time or 64% of the time? No one, right?
No, I'm trying to be hysterical as often as possible.
But if you think about it from an advertiser's perspective, how often should people be hysterical about health or sports or gambling or politics or just whatever you can put on that list? Shoot, I want people to be hysterical as much as it takes to get them to watch 24 hours of TV a day. I'm willing to stop at 24 hours of TV a day. I don't think that people need to have 3 different TV sets on with 3 different channels at the same time. But if I want to really promote my station, I want hysteria 24 hours a day, people tuned in to hear about the great reforms that are going on in Washington, D.C., and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and in Dayton, Ohio, and all of those really important places where the important people live. All the people that are important that are not me, because I'm not important. President Johnson or President Roosevelt, those are the important people, not me. That's kind of that background message. Everybody be hysterical, and by the way, you're not really that important. But you can become important if you just are hysterical the right way about the right things. And yeah. And make sure that you check, that you properly fill out the test when you do the test at the end of the school year. Make sure that you properly mark the boxes fully, or you won't get credit if you don't fill in the circle all the way. You know that, right? Did you learn your Social Security number? Did you go to college?
Yes.
Did you learn your Social Security number in college?
Well, I think I learned it before that.
Oh, did you? I learned my Social Security number in college. What else is something that you learned in college that's really important that you think to note? Could be, a vocational thing that really is important. I'm not saying this just as a joke, but what's something you learned in college? I know it's been a couple of weeks, so you might have forgotten a few of the things, but what's something really important you learned in college? I learned actually a couple of funny quotes. I honestly can tell you a couple quotes that I learned in college that you will laugh at.
All right.
You got nothing?
Honestly, I don't think I learned anything in college. It's probably why,
You learned nothing in college? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I went to college as a ignorant, self-righteous idealist, and I left college as an ignorant, self-righteous idealist. However, in the gap of 6 years or whatever it was, I also learned a couple good quotes. The job of the media is not to control what the people think. It is to control what the people think about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know who said it, and I'm paraphrasing it. It's not a direct quote. But I remember that, and I learned it in a radio, TV, mass media communication course as an undergraduate. I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, that is not how it should be, probably. I think that was my reaction.
That goes back to the whole why thing. Like I said, when we start asking ourselves why, then that quote actually covers that, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Why am I getting told this? Because it's trying to control what I think about. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and the reality is that quote is only as funny and, useful as it is. Media is to program people's attention, yes. It's also to program people's interpretations and their behaviors. And if we know that. I make my reference to Edward Bernays, which most people don't know, but occasionally I'll interact with somebody on Facebook, and I actually, a few days ago, somebody posted a link to Edward Bernays' book Propaganda in the middle of an interaction, and I hadn't brought up Edward Bernays yet, and they're throwing in some of my favorite references. And as a reminder, I'm pretty sure you've heard me talk about Edward Bernays. You do remember the name, or you don't?
I do, yes.
Okay, what did he promote? Do you remember a couple things that he promoted?
I do not remember. I have not read anything that he's ever written, so
yeah.
I don't remember anything specific.
So the first thing that he promoted was World War I. He created a massive web of inaccurate, intelligence reports and got them published in newspapers throughout the U.S. to demonize the German people. This was like in 1912 and such, to demonize the German people in the American consciousness and make us want to go and rescue the victims there. So it created this perception, and it was successful. And after, Americans, public opinion was shifted, and people eventually were at least less resistant to borrowing massive amounts of money to invade Europe. Then the U.S. invaded Europe, and then, maybe a year later, a decade later, the newspaper printed a retraction and said, "Oh, we lied to you that other time," but it didn't matter. They already, the war was, the U.S. was in the war, and so anyway, some people in other commercial businesses noticed what success De Beers had, noticed what success that Bernays had with promoting World War I through deception and fraud and all that. And so De Beers was one of the companies that hired him, and he promoted diamonds. And that's the reference that you've heard me talk about, but you just don't know his name, that he was the guy who developed the campaigns that they used. And then the other thing he promoted was cigarettes. So he used emotions. His uncle was Sigmund Freud. He used emotional repression and emotional associations to associate the smoking of cigarettes with penises and power and independence. So women who smoked cigarettes were doing so as an act of revolution. It was to overthrow the sexist whatever. It was like this whole weird set of layers of how he set all the associations up. But ultimately, he set up associations. He hired actors, and he hired, photojournalists to go and take pictures of these actors doing the demonstration. And then the pictures of the demonstrators, who were actors, got published in all these different newspapers because he paid them to run those stories. So if you've got a big enough budget, you can get it printed, And he got a huge resistance in the American public amongst women to smoke in public. It wasn't that women didn't smoke in the U.S. They didn't smoke in public. And he changed that. And as far as diamond jewelry, the basic thing was he got, they wrote movies to promote diamond rings, and then they had diamond necklaces and stuff where they would have the stars. They created these celebrities in Hollywood, and then put them in, expensive dresses or suits or whatever, and they would wear, the women would wear diamond jewelry, diamond earrings, diamond necklace, all this diamond stuff, and then they would print it in the newspapers and not present it as advertisement. They would just say, here's a diamond necklace that you can buy at Franklin & Sons diamond company for $29 million. And by the way, next page, there's a discount. That same thing. It's 20% off this week, only at Franklin's Diamonds or whatever, right? So Bernays is the guy who developed all of that publicity. So he created the field of public relations.
Wow. Well, a long way we've come since then, huh?
Yeah, and that's why, you should buy a diamond ring. And you should never pawn it or sell it, because diamonds are forever. And who came up with that slogan? Edward Bernays. I don't know for a fact that he did, but he was the guy behind all of that stuff. Diamonds are a girl's best friend. That was Edward Bernays. Well, Edward Bernays was the guy who came up with that, though. He is the guy who hired the producer to make the film, to create the stars, and to write the scripts. He was behind all of it. Product placement was basically his innovation, and the products that they placed was diamond jewelry, in particular diamond rings. That was the big thing. But also cigarettes. Cigarettes were very big in movies. I don't know if you know that detail, but older movies, cigarette smoking is huge.
Yeah,
All the cool guys smoked cigarettes, man. That was a massive promotional, success. Go ahead.
Well, no, I've seen smoking and how big it was in older movies. Yes.
Yeah.
So how they were promoted through, at the time, the greatest form of media. I'd imagine it was anyway.
Yeah, and it's cool to smoke cigarettes, which is why we named our cigarette brand KOOL, because it's cool.
Yeah, no, it's genius, all right. I mean, there's no question about it. And it's the kind of brilliance that many wouldn't even focus on. I mean, they wouldn't even.
It's subtle. Yeah.
Care, probably.
And back to your comment about the techniques used with 5-year-olds and 12-year-olds or whatever, when you don't have to tell people, when you just present that message or that sub-message, whatever, it's not even in the script. It's not even, hey, would you say yes to marry me if I buy you an expensive diamond ring? And then, or Bob, do you think that my girlfriend will say yes to marry me if I buy an expensive diamond ring? And then Bob says, yeah, it better be an expensive diamond ring because, amethyst and just a plain gold band won't do it. No, it didn't have to be explicit in those scripts. The message is communicated over and over through the storyline, And back to public.
And to the average eye, it would be subtle, so subtle that you wouldn't even question it. Right. I mean, I understand that concept. It's not an overt, like, oh, here's what we're trying to promote to you people today. Here it is. Well, no, they're not saying that. I understand it's very subtle, and that, many they're just watching the script. They can't pick up on other things. They're not perceptive enough to pick up on, well, why is that in the script, and why is that? I mean, I talk to people on movies.
Okay.
They certainly can talk well about what happened, but they might not get a lot of references. That might say, oh, remember that when they were charging, they'd be like, oh, no, I didn't catch that.
Right. Oh, yeah. It could be in the script, but they just won't emphasize, they won't remember that point, yeah. Embedding programs within stories is a very powerful way to operate. That's, parables in religious contexts, whatever. I had a question. You've never really been a cigarette smoker, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Well, I just had a curiosity. Why is it that people associate smoking cigarettes with right after having sex? And I don't really know. There could be some other explanation, but I'm wondering if part of it is the programming we're talking about.
It has to be, because I don't believe there's any kind of physical reason. There's no what am I trying to look? There's no physical effect, so it's got to be. yeah, with some kind of promotion that carried down through the years.
I just
don't know what it was, but right, because there's no physical gratification from smoking a cigarette after sex.
I'm already relaxed. Why do I need another cigarette? If I'm as relaxed as I am right after sex, anyway? The idea that cigarettes will relax you after sex is like the most relaxed anybody ever is, right? But the other thing I thought of was cigars. So as you were talking, I thought, well, what about cigars? You find out somebody's pregnant, or they just had maybe their baby. Not when they find out they're pregnant, but they deliver their baby, and what happens? The guys go off and say, "Oh, you had a baby," and it's a girl and it's the boy cigars. And once you find out, okay, you had a healthy delivery, now the guys go off and they have a cigar. Again, something connected to sex in a way, but when did that start? And I don't know. I've never thought about it. I don't even really care, but that's what I thought of when I'm thinking of how did cigarettes get associated with sex, other than what Edward Bernays did and all the movies and everything. I don't know. And then as far as cigars, I don't know when that started. I do know that when I read about diamonds, I read that in the 19th century and 18th century, not only did no one have diamond rings, but virtually no one had diamonds. They weren't around, you know? There was no diamond jewelry at all, is the point. They were very rare.
So when you say respect tradition, all you're simply saying is, who cares? I mean,
well,
in other words, you can look at tradition and say, well, here's what started it, and here's why it's a big deal. But who would be against that? Why does it matter, right?
Well, respect tradition would be recognize that a tradition is a tradition. People can hold to them hysterically, which is useful to know, so that if a tradition seems quite illogical, like the idea of diamond rings is a tradition for a wedding or an engagement ring and so on. If that's a tradition, well, it came from something, and it's I can respect that as a tradition without trying to cure everybody of all the illogical traditions. There's just too many illogical traditions for me to get upset about any one of them, That's another aspect of what I usually mean when I'm talking about respecting tradition.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I don't need to save the world from Santa Claus. I don't need to save the world from enriching De Beers by paying lots of money for diamond rings. I don't need to prevent women from smoking cigarettes. I don't need to avoid using manipulative PR techniques to get people to hire the clients that hire me to do their plumbing repairs. Is literally what I was thinking of. Last week or two, I've done a couple websites for some of my plumbing clients that are largely visual based. They're fluff, they're funny, they're cute, and they're good. They're good things, and they're good along with the fact that those plumbers have good reviews and they're really skilled, experienced plumbers. But why is their web page better than it was a month ago or better than their competitor's web page? It's not based on their skill. Their skill hasn't changed in the last month, but their web page is better because I believe it's better because I presented a more fun, fluffy, emotional, effective, evocative set of images. Part of it was I added images of people, like somebody. There's one, I could show this to you. One with an infant wearing his diaper, and he's got his plunger, and he's going up to the toilet to work to do the plunger in the toilet. And my little headline that goes with that is, are all the plumbers the same? Don't you want an experienced plumber when you have a clog or whatever? So it's cute, but it's not illogical. There's just a lot of emotion to it, And frankly, you've got to do something. You make a web page, you got to put something there. What are you going to write? We're a good plumber, here's our phone number? Fine. You might want to include that somewhere, but you don't have to stop there,
Right. Makes sense. Do you want to cut the recording for a second?
Okay.